BPC-157, one of the most talked about peptides when recovery drags on longer than expected. It usually comes up when an injury isn't new, but it never quite finishes healing. Pain fades, then returns. Movement works, but confidence doesn't. People often describe feeling almost healed for months. BPC-157 is a lab-made fragment of a protective protein your body already produces, especially in the gut. That protein plays a role in tissue repair and inflammation control. The idea isn't to replace the healing process, but to support the one that's already underway. In animal studies, BPC-157 has been associated with improved blood flow toward damaged tissue and the formation of small new blood vessels. That matters because healing depends on timing. Oxygen, nutrients, and repair cells need to arrive together. When that coordination slips, recovery stalls even if the body knows what to do. People who use BPC-157 rarely describe dramatic pain relief. What they notice instead is that irritated joints calm down, tendons feel less reactive, and old injuries stop demanding attention. There's usually no clear moment where something fixes. That's because the effect isn't about masking pain. It's about restoring order to the repair process so signals stop misfiring. Most human evidence is still limited, with real-world use relying heavily on self-experimentation rather than large trials. That uncertainty keeps it controversial. The subtle shift is behavioral. You stop guarding the movement, you load normally again, and trust returns quietly without announcing when it happened. TB500. This one usually comes up when recovery feels incomplete. The injury isn't flaring, but it doesn't feel solid either. Rehab works on paper, yet movement still feels cautious. Strength returns unevenly. You move, but you don't fully trust the tissue. TB500 is a synthetic version of thymosin beta-4, a peptide your body releases after tissue damage. Its role isn't to calm irritation, it's to guide the rebuild. Think direction, not suppression. It helps repair cells move where they're needed and organize how new tissue forms. That organization matters most in tendons, ligaments, and connective tissue. When healing is poorly directed, the body often fills gaps with stiff scar tissue. The area closes, but it doesn't function well. TB500 shifts that outcome toward tissue that's more flexible and resilient under load. What people notice isn't a drop in pain, it's smoother mechanics. Joints stop catching. Muscles stop tightening ahead of movement. Range of motion returns because the structure underneath is improving, not because signals are being blocked. The subtle effect is confidence arriving early. Movement feels normal again, sometimes before the tissue is fully reinforced. That can be helpful and misleading. Human evidence is still limited, and most real-world use is based on anecdotal reports rather than controlled trials. That uncertainty is part of the risk. TB500 doesn't make tissue indestructible. It makes progress feel faster. The danger is assuming smooth movement means the job is done. CJC-1295. Common among those who are training consistently but feel like recovery keeps setting the pace. Workouts get done. Nutrition is dialed in. Progress just takes more effort than it should. CJC-1295 signals the pituitary gland to release more of your own growth hormone. It doesn't replace hormones or force constant elevation. It supports the same pulse-based system your body already uses, with most of the effects showing up during sleep. As those nighttime pulses strengthen, recovery starts to smooth out. Soreness clears faster. Sleep feels deeper. Training stops carrying the same drag. What changes first isn't performance, it's follow-through. Fewer skipped sessions, less hesitation getting started. Fatigue loses its leverage earlier in the day. Growth hormone doesn't act selectively. It amplifies whatever signals are already present. Solid habits pay off faster. Poor sleep or chronic stress become harder to ignore. The peptide doesn't compensate for behavior. It magnifies it. Because the process is gradual, most people don't notice a single moment where things kick in. Progress shows up as consistency rather than spikes. Days stack instead of resetting. Human data is still limited, and most use remains off-label. For that reason, CJC-1295 is usually treated as long-term support rather than a short-term tool. The effect isn't feeling boosted, it's realizing recovery stopped being the bottleneck that dictated everything else. IGF-1 LR3. Training is solid, recovery is decent, but results arrive slower than expected. Effort goes in. Adaptation lags behind. Progress feels capped by time. This peptide works further downstream than growth hormone. Instead of signaling for hormones to be released, it delivers the message cells respond to directly. It tells muscle and other tissues to grow, repair, and pull in fuel without waiting for the usual chain of events. As that signal strengthens, the first change isn't size, it's efficiency. Calories stop being neutral. More glucose and amino acids get directed into muscle tissue instead of sitting unused. Recovery tightens up. Soreness still shows up, but it clears sooner. The gap between work and visible change shrinks. That shift quietly alters behavior. Training starts to feel more productive. The same sessions produce more noticeable return. Gains begin to feel expected rather than earned. Plateaus become harder to tolerate, not because motivation increases, but because adaptation speeds up. The risk follows that acceleration. IGF-1 overlaps with insulin signaling, which narrows the margin for error. Miss a meal or miss time training and blood sugar drops quickly. Lightheadedness and sudden fatigue can show up without warning. Use is off-label, and human data is limited. IGF-1 LR3 isn't a shortcut, it's a compression of feedback. Results arrive faster, which makes restraint matter more than effort. Follistatin 344 works by interfering with myostatin, a signal your body uses to limit how much muscle it builds. That signal isn't there to slow motivation. It exists to keep growth aligned with the strength of tendons, joints, and connective tissue. When myostatin activity drops, the ceiling lifts. What changes first isn't speed, it's permission. The body stops signaling restraint. Training produces adaptation without hitting resistance as early. Sets feel manageable deeper into sessions. Recovery overlaps with growth instead of competing with it. Nothing feels extreme, it just feels allowed. That's where the shift happens. Progress doesn't feel dramatic, it feels normal. Gains show up without demanding attention, which makes limits harder to sense. Volume creeps up. Load increases quietly. The absence of friction gets mistaken for durability. Follistatin doesn't act alone, it amplifies whatever signals are present. Training, calories, sleep. When muscle growth accelerates, supporting structures don't automatically keep pace. Human evidence remains limited, and most use is experimental. The appeal is obvious, but the trade-off is subtle. Follistatin 344 doesn't make progress faster. It removes the stop sign and leaves it up to the rest of the system to keep up. GLP-1. Useful when appetite feels louder than intention. Meals turn into negotiations. Cravings interrupt focus. Eating feels reactive, even when motivation is high. GLP-1s mimic a hormone your gut already uses to communicate with your brain after you eat. That signal slows digestion, steadies insulin response, and tells your appetite it's satisfied sooner than expected. Food still matters, it just stops demanding immediate attention. As that signaling becomes more consistent, timing changes. Hunger arrives later. Blood sugar swings flatten. Cravings lose urgency. Portions shrink without effort, not because discipline improves, but because the internal signal noise drops. Eating stops feeling like a problem that needs solving. That shift alters behavior quickly. Snacking becomes optional. Planning meals feels easier. Focus stretches longer between interruptions. Weight loss follows not through force, but through reduced friction. Less resistance means fewer decisions. There's a second layer that shows up over time. GLP-1 signaling also touches reward pathways. Food delivers less dopamine. That makes restraint easier, and sometimes dulls motivation if calories drop too far. Muscle loss can follow if protein intake and resistance training fall behind. Unlike many peptides, GLP-1s are widely approved pharmaceuticals, though use now extends far beyond their original purpose. Long-term outcomes depend heavily on how they're paired with behavior. GLP-1s don't remove hunger. They change how much influence it has over what you do next. Retatrutide. Weight loss works at first, then slows for no obvious reason. Calories drop, hunger returns, energy fades, progress stalls even though effort stays the same. Retatrutide targets 3 systems at once: appetite regulation, insulin sensitivity, and energy expenditure. Instead of focusing on a single signal, it shifts how the body decides when to eat, how it handles fuel, and whether stored energy gets released or defended. As those signals align, eating less stops triggering the same pushback. Hunger quiets, but more importantly, metabolism resists slowing down to match intake. Energy levels hold steadier across the day. Fewer crashes, less reactive eating. Fat becomes easier to access instead of something the body aggressively protects. That changes behavior without drawing attention to itself. Movement increases naturally. Snacking fades. Decisions feel lighter because fewer corrections are needed. Weight loss feels less like constant management and more like momentum. The flip side shows up when results accelerate. Rapid changes can outpace muscle retention if resistance training and appetite suppression can also lead to undereating without realizing it, especially when energy feels stable. Human data is still emerging, and use remains off-label. Outcomes depend heavily on context. Retatrutide doesn't just help you eat less, it shifts how hard your body argues back, which is why progress can feel easier and why structure still matters. Melanotan 2 is about appearance rather than performance. People hear about it as a shortcut to darker skin without sun exposure, but that's only part of why it draws attention. Melanotan 2 is a synthetic version of a hormone your body already produces called alpha-MSH. That hormone tells skin cells to increase melanin production when they sense UV exposure. More melanin means darker pigmentation, which is why skin tone deepens without sunlight. As that signal increases, visible changes show up quickly. Freckles darken. Pigment spreads unevenly at first, then settles. To the body, it feels like protective mode has been switched on, as if enough sun exposure has already occurred. That same signal reaches beyond the skin. Alpha-MSH also interacts with areas of the brain involved in arousal, appetite, and impulse control. As pigmentation changes, behavior often shifts first. People report feeling more confident before anything visibly changes. Posture adjusts, clothing choices change. Exposure feels easier. The signal moves ahead of the outcome. The risks follow the pathway. Overstimulating pigment cells can lead to uneven coloring that doesn't always reverse. Blood pressure and heart rate can fluctuate. Nausea is common early on. Because sourcing is unregulated, dosage and purity vary widely. Melanotan 2 doesn't just alter appearance. It changes how the body perceives risk and readiness, which is why the effects often show up in behavior before they show up in the mirror. Peptides sit at the edge of intervention. They accelerate outcomes by changing signals, not habits. If you want to understand the compounds that support function before things reach that point, check out the next video.